In the book of Isaiah, chapter 11, verse 6, there resides one of the most famous passages in the whole of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. A passage that's familiar to people the world over, believers and unbelievers alike. Quote, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them." Close quote. In traditional Christian thought, this verse tends to be interpreted in a rather literal and straightforward way. It's taken to be an idyllic description of what life on earth will be like when the kingdom of God is made manifest. People will forget all their disputes and their differences. Everyone will coexist in peace and harmony and brotherhood, and the little boy, child, obviously, is taken to be a prophecy that foretells the coming of Jesus of Nazareth as the promised Messiah. In fact, that's normally the number one verse that Christian theologians point to as evidence that the coming of Christ was foretold in the Hebrew Scriptures. As you might expect, the Jewish interpretation tends to be far less literal and far less straightforward than the Christian one. Where the Christian theologian sees a prophecy of Jesus, the Jewish theologian sees something more esoteric, something more difficult to pin down. But the 17th century Pomeranian Hebraist and Old Testament scholar Samuel Bohl, while he stopped short of coming out and saying that Isaiah 11:6 isn't a prophecy of the coming of Christ, he did nonetheless have a certain amount of sympathy with the Jewish view that the passage does permit of a fair number of different alternate interpretations. And as a professional Hebraist, he ought to have known what the hell he was talking about, since he was still reading the stuff in the original language that the author wrote it in, and since pretty much all things written in Hebrew permit of being interpreted in various ways. If you want an object lesson in the thing I'm talking about, get yourself out a pen and paper, write a 10-page letter to your closest friend in English, but without using any vowels or any definite articles or spaces between the words. When your friend receives the letter, his or her task will be effectively the same task that biblical scholars have when they endeavor to interpret the meanings of ancient Semitic texts, because that's exactly how those languages were written back in ancient times. But in Samuel Bohl's treatise on the book of Isaiah, he proposes an altogether different reading of the verse in question, while still being careful to stipulate that it was just a fun thought experiment and he wasn't actually calling church orthodoxy into question. So after making reasonably sure he won't be hauled before the Inquisition for saying it, Bohl then proposes that perhaps, just maybe, Isaiah 11:6 is actually a cautionary parable about what happens to societies that abandon their traditional standards of decency. Societies where moral relativism becomes the only kind of morality there is. Societies that go so far down the road of celebrating hedonism and profligacy, masquerading as freedom and liberty, that the adults in the society wind up completely losing the ability to distinguish right from wrong, and truth from falsehood, and beauty from ugliness. And the only people left in the population who have any sort of functioning moral compass are the little children who will lead them. And boy, oh boy, do we have some little children providing powerful moral leadership in our country today. To the boys and girls at Marshall Simonds Middle School in Burlington, Massachusetts, I send the following message. You are what bravery looks like. You are what leadership looks like. There's a lot of sniveling, pathetic, cowardly adults in this country who would do well to emulate your example of simply refusing to comply, the consequences be damned, when you know a thing is wrong. In fact, you kids are such great Americans and so worthy of being celebrated. This whole episode is all about you. Jim Eagle, hit the music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I'm so hungry I could eat 2 gay Nigerian weightlifters and a Subway sandwich. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And if you've been living under a rock for the last 48 hours and haven't heard about these latest spasms of dangerous right-wing extremist white supremacist wrongthink erupting in suburban Boston and the Muslim enclaves around Detroit, And yeah, I guarantee you some poor flunky at CNN just got handed the assignment of writing a segment called The Rise of MAGA Muslim White Supremacy. Then do allow me to bring you up to speed. And hey, no judgment about living under a rock. You do you. Marshall Simonds Middle School in Burlington, Massachusetts is exactly what you would expect of a public middle school in suburban Boston in the year of our Lord 2023, which is to say approximately 138% of the teachers and administrators at this school are wild-eyed woke activists who think their job is running a factory that churns out smaller versions of themselves by the hundreds every year. So they don't assign any great importance to archaic, outmoded educational concepts like teaching kids to read and write and add and subtract, maybe learn a little bit of history, but by God, every kid that matriculates out of Marshall Simonds Middle School knows the things that really matter. Where to get an abortion, climate change will destroy the earth in 9 years, white heterosexuals are the same as Nazis, trans rights are human rights, all great literary works feature adolescent boys blowing adult men, and so on. And as you don't need me to tell you, the month of June is the most important part of the woke liturgical calendar. June is the month when we show how morally virtuous we are by cheering rapturously as face-tattooed men in leather bondage gear parade down Main Street, flagellating each other with a cat o' nine tails. And the next morning, after we wipe the Astroglide out of our eyes and realize we're late for work, we get down to the important task of making sure all the children their parents leave in our charge are covered head to toe in obnoxious rainbow apparel and shouting our favorite pro-gay slogans at the top of their little lungs. Because being a professional educator means using other people's kids as dress-up toys and sock puppets and hobby horses for your own political views. And so with that spirit in mind, the administration of Simonds Middle School sends out a notice saying, okay kids, it's Pride Day next week, the most important event on the entire woke liturgical calendar, and you all better show up looking like a Liberace fever dream if you know what's good for you. Now, they didn't phrase it quite in such sinister terms, but it's not really that far off. There was a heavy implied undercurrent of, look, I'm not going to say you're required to comply since I'm a public school official and I am not allowed to mandate that you participate in religious rituals, but having said that, let's just say we wouldn't want anything bad to happen to any kids who don't wear enough rainbows or celebrate non-normative sexualities with sufficient enthusiasm. Capiche? Wouldn't it be great if we could pretend this was a one-time incident at one school with a uniquely depraved teaching staff and administrators? Yeah, it would. But that ain't the reality. The reality is this sort of stuff has been going on for some years now at public schools all across the fruited plain, no pun intended. To the extent that parents and voters have supported it or participated in it or facilitated it or quietly acquiesced to it or never paid enough attention to know what the hell was going on, they should be ashamed of themselves. To the extent that the parents and voters in this specific town of Burlington, Massachusetts have allowed their local middle school to become a den of groomers and perverts and pedophiles, they should be ashamed of themselves. Somebody at some point, somewhere, had to stand up and say, nah, dude, this is stupid and sick and I'm not going to do it. And a little child shall lead them. Out of all the groups of normal, decent people of conscience in the United States of America who could have stood up at any point in the last decade or more and said, no, this is wrong, we won't comply, it fell to the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders at Simonds Middle School, 11 to 13-year-olds, in other words, to be the ones to stand up for truth and decency. And they did it knowing full well they would be immediately declared bigots and hate mongers, not only by their school's administrators, but by the nationwide fake news media. Don't believe me? Well, here comes the official statement from the district superintendent. And as you listen to this mealy-mouthed, slimy load of woke horse shit, where this guy talks as if some horrific sort of hate crime has taken place, first try to count the number of lies and half-truths and weasel words and dumbass woke catchphrases you hear, and second, bear in mind what actually happened here. The school basically ordered all the kids to wear clothes celebrating homosexuality, and the kids said, no, we're not going to do that. What did they wear instead? Stars and stripes, baby. They showed up dressed like American patriots, and they started a chant saying, "My pronouns are USA." And just, bravo, kids. That is very solid stuff. And for committing that grievous crime against the orthodoxies of the woke state religion, well, they've all been declared dirty, filthy istophobes by CNN, because of course they have. But then CNN does have a long and rather distinguished track record of smearing minor children as bigots and istophobes whenever the mood happens to strike, which of course is why they had to pay $80 million goddamn dollars to Nick Sandmann. And boy, I hope that kid is enjoying every last dollar of that settlement money. And all right, without further ado, here's the full statement from the groomer pedophile scumbag superintendent. Quote, "Dear Burlington community, one of the core values of Burlington Public Schools, including Marshall Simonds Middle School, is our respect for human difference. We are committed to acknowledging and celebrating the diversity that makes up our community, and we strive every day to make our schools a place where anyone can feel safe and welcome. The rise in anti-LGBTQ+ violence across the country is unacceptable and has no place in our schools. We recognize that intolerance can manifest in many different ways, and unfortunately, our school community experienced intolerance during the school day on Friday. Students who participated in the Spectrum Club led a celebration of National Pride Month that included posters in support of identity pride and other symbols of LGBTQ+ identity, such as rainbow flags and clothing. Unfortunately, some of these symbols were damaged on Friday during the school day by some students. The Spectrum Club is one of many interest-based clubs where students who share similar interests, along with allies, can gather and support one another. Like any Spirit Day celebration at MSMS, participation is optional. Respectful behavior across the entire student body, however, is non-negotiable. I recognize that discussions and celebrations of individual identity are complex and impacted by individual values, religions, and cultural norms, the result of which may include expressions of racism, anti-religious hate, ableism, and in this case, homophobia. The Burlington Public Schools are obligated to provide a safe environment for all students to feel safe, seen, and respected without retaliation. We ask all staff, teachers, and members of the Burlington Public School community to join us in taking a stand against homophobia and identity-directed hateful actions. We also recognize that it is not enough to publicly denounce these incidents as they happen. As a school system, we have a unique opportunity to educate our community on the nature of these events. The work we do in the Burlington Public Schools and at MSMS is not easy. It often leads to difficult and uncomfortable conversations. Nevertheless, we encourage you to discuss differences with your families to try and make sense of how one's actions always impact others. The Burlington Public Schools believe in the individual dignity and humanity of each and every person in our community. We embrace everyone for who they are and for what they bring to our schools and larger community. Our staff have and will continue to receive resources, materials, and training to help identify and respond to identity, bigotry, and discrimination. As these lessons extend beyond the classroom, we invite all students, parents, guardians, and other community members to participate in this ongoing dialogue. A list of resources on how to talk to adults and children about identity hate is available below. Let us all work on being kinder to each other. Sincerely, Eric M. Conti, Ph.D., Superintendent, close quote. Remind me again, Jim Eagle, what does Ph.D. stand for? That's what I thought. Presently holding dick. Have you ever heard a more nauseating load of tripe in your entire natural-born life? I myself have not. Dude, Eric, may I call you Eric? For a man with that much fancy book learning, you sure seem like a total dumbass. It's almost like you have no concept of the fact that children have a function aside from being billboards and dress-up toys for people like you Sick bastards, I believe they're called, to advertise your sick bastard view of the world. You spend years and years relentlessly shoving this stuff down the throats of people who want no part of it. Then you drag their high schoolers into it. Then you drag their middle schoolers into it. Then you drag elementary school kids into it. Then you put fucking gay porn and drag queens in kindergarten. And when, for the first time, there is any sort of pushback from a large group of people, preteen kids in this case, you chalk it all up to bigotry and intolerance? Do you even realize you just called 11-year-old children bigots and homophobes? Could a man in your position do something sleazier than that if he was trying? The kids never said anything about gay people. They expressed no view of any kind, made no value judgment whatsoever about homosexuality itself. And here you are calling them bigots and homophobes. Why would you do a thing like that? Because you're embarrassed? Because you don't like having your bullshit called out? Because you thought you could turn this whole school district into your personal gay fiefdom and nobody would ever notice or care? Well, Eric, go ahead and consider yourself disabused of that delusion. Just so we're clear, if the kids had acted as you wanted them to act, if they had all shown up in their obligatory head-to-toe rainbow gear and chanted all the dumb woke slogans you told them to chant, would you have called them bigoted and intolerant then? Nah, of course you wouldn't have. You would have given them all a high five and a shiny star for affirming your political views. And even if it was a false, disingenuous affirmation, even if it was just people going along to get along, as it usually is, just going through the motions so they don't risk getting digitally lynched by the woke rage mob, did these kids violate any school rule by wearing patriotic garb? Of course they didn't. Did they violate any school rule by chanting my pronouns or USA instead of the dumb gay Marxist slogan you wanted them to chant? Of course they didn't. Did their actions cause the slightest harm to anyone? Of course they didn't. Does wearing an American flag shirt and chanting a patriotic slogan mean you hate gay people? Well, yes, it does. Apparently, if you ask the local fake news media in Boston and the national fake news media more broadly, quote, troubling displays of homophobia at a local middle school, unquote, mules the first local fake news performance artist. Some teachers and administrators wonder if these hateful attitudes are being taught at home, scolds another. The journalisming here is so thick you can cut it with a knife, ladies and gentlemen. And to the kids at Simonds Middle School, I will say this again because it bears repeating. You kids are American heroes. You're never too young to stand up for what you know is right. You are never too young to take on a corrupt establishment. And you are never too young to assert your rights as a free citizen of a free country. One of those rights being the right to not be used as a vessel for somebody else's sick, abhorrent, indefensible view of the world. I guess this whole episode has sort of been a Pride Month update, but hell, let's do the Pride Month update anyway, shall we? Best Pride Month ever. Major League Baseball has quietly instructed its teams to stop wearing rainbow pride gear. And that's quite a hell of a departure from where we were just a couple months ago at the start of the season when practically every club had a whole array of woke Skittle vomit branded apparel to wear on the field or sell in the team store or both. But then Bud Light happened. And then Target happened. And then Call of Duty happened. The Call of Duty thing, by the way, shows no signs of abating, as we thought it mightn't. And you know it's getting bad when you start seeing video titles on YouTube like, Call of Duty is officially the Bud Light of video games. And isn't that so much fun, too, that the name Bud Light is now casual shorthand for any company that just totally wrecked its brand through woke wankery? When you say the words Bud Light now, there's only around a 50-50 chance that you're even talking about shitty beer. And I think there's a word for all this stuff we see happening now during the best Pride Month ever. What's that word? Oh, that's right. Winning. This is what winning looks like. This is what it looks like when truth and decency and sanity reassert themselves after far too many years spent wandering in the woke wilderness. And the winning will continue apace so long as the forces of normalcy and common sense keep the pedal to the metal and their feet on the throats of those who would seek to tyrannize us and recruit our kids into their weird, creepy sex cult. And to any LGBTQIA, EIEIO activists who may be watching, look, I understand your butt hurt. Figuratively, not literally. It can be hard thinking you run the whole world and realizing you don't. And you guys had it made for a really long time. You could pretty much do any flamboyant, gay, trans thing you wanted to do, and few people would notice or care, just as long as you left the kids out of it. That was the only request that was ever being made. Please don't involve children in your weird, creepy sex fetish. But you just couldn't abide it. You had to keep pushing and shoving and pushing and shoving until finally you damn well fairly earned the enmity of the average man and woman on the street. And now we will watch with boundless delight as you reap the whirlwind you so richly deserve to reap. And keep up the good work, America. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Have an outstanding day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply just like the Simonds middle school kids didn't comply, and get off my lawn.